Your reaction, what was your first reaction?
I felt a great deal of elation that this war criminal, Mladic, had finally been apprehended and now will face justice at The Hague, and hopefully will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Mladic, Milosevic, who of course has passed away, and many of the other key figures in the genocide that was committed with absolute impunity, with the world all looking on, including UN peacekeepers, particularly in Srebrenica, not to hold those individuals to account when we had access to the battlefield so many years later. You know, very often war criminals disappear when the lines, like in North Korea, for example, and there's no access to those individuals who committed crimes. Well, in Bosnia, we have had access, and Serbia especially, and have failed for all these years. But I think we should really thank, you know, the Serbian Helsinki Commission and many of the human rights advocates inside of Serbia itself, who were dogged in their determination because they loathed what this man and others like him had done. And certainly the Bosnians have been unceasing in calling for, including people like Ray Suric and others, for justice, that there's no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity or genocide, and Srebrenica was a genocide.
Serbian President Boris Tadic yesterday said that Serbia had wiped the stain away.
Well, I think, you know, all stains like this, certainly there are so many Serbians who have absolutely no complicity in these heinous crimes against humanity and in genocide. But all of those who have need to be held to account, and certainly their leadership who ordered these massive killings against women and children, and in the case of Srebrenica, mostly men who happen to be Muslim and were singled out and then butchered over the course of 3 days in July 1995. I remember raising the issue repeatedly in hearings, in statements, in visits to the former Yugoslavia, and the fact that the UNPROFOR was not only not even a speed bump in stopping these killing fields, which actually was a bit of enablers, because it gave a false sense of protection. The safe havens that were supposed to be mustering areas for people to flock to find safety turned out to be mustering areas for mass killings. And nowhere else on earth do I remember a place like Srebrenica where, under the watchful eye, turned out to be less than watchful, in this case the Dutch peacekeepers, turned over something on the order of 8,000 men who were slaughtered over the course of 3 days. I've been there. I was there for a reinternment a few years ago. A very moving experience to see people who were buried in mass graves, at least given the very minimal dignity of an individual burial, with prayer and very important memorial speeches by clerics and by some high political leaders in the area. So it's a.
Does Serbia deserve to be in the EU now?
Well, I think Serbia, needs to, like the other countries in the Balkans, the sooner they're integrated, the better, and that goes for Bosnia, it goes for Serbia. The sooner they're matriculate into the NATO as full partners, and I'm talking about all the countries in that area, the better. We know for a fact that NATO integration absolutely leads to a safer and more predictable type of foreign policy on the part of countries. We've seen it with the Turks and the Greeks time and time again, that being part of NATO has helped mitigate some very long-standing disputes between the two countries, particularly in the Aegean. My hope is that the sooner Bosnia, Serbia, and the rest of the Balkan countries are fully integrated into Europe, the better.
So this means the arrest of Mladic would mean really opening.
Well, I think it's a major.
Serbia in
Yes,
particular.
yes, I think it is. There's no doubt about it. The Serbian leadership and the Serbian human rights groups, but also those in other countries as well, all deserve credit. Our commission has never ceased in calling or taking our eye off the ball, that Mladic, like Karadzic, need to be held fully to account. And so there's one remaining at-large individual that is very high profile that needs to be apprehended. But the message that goes to the world from this, I think, is that there is no statute of limitations on war crimes. Just like after the Holocaust, the Nazi hunters were tenacious in tracking down, they didn't get all of them, but they apprehended many of them and put them into prison for the rest of their lives, so that, whether it be in Rwanda or any other place, Sudan, or obviously Srebrenica, and the former Yugoslavia, that people are held to account for these terrible crimes.
One remaining high-profile individual would be Goran Hadžić, I assume, right? You're referring to.
That's exactly Goran Hadžić.
Now, Mladic will be heading to The Hague.
Yes.
And some people advocate the trial together with
Yes.
Karadzic. Do you think
I think that's a
it's
great
not-
idea. I mean, Karadzic has been, since 2007, the trial has been slow. It has not proceeded as fast as some of us would have liked, but he's still obviously incarcerated, so that means he's not free, nor should he ever be. And I think, given the witnesses and the overlap of heinous crimes committed by both of them, they were partners in genocide, partners in crimes against humanity. It would be very easy to integrate Mladic into that trial.
Now, one thing that left a lot of people wondering is Serbian government has been for 16 years claiming they did not know where Mladic was.
Right.
Now, the chief Hague prosecutor, Serge Bramertz, is supposed to give his report to the UN Security Council next month. The EU Foreign Policy Chief, Catherine Ashton, was in Belgrade before the news even broke out. Is that just a happy coincidence, you think, or was it something more than
I don't have any insight on that. Sorry.
Do you have any information how much the U.S. had to do with his arrest and the rape?
My suspicion is, they have not conveyed that to us on the commission, is that this was really, local, probably more than anything else. We do have a parliamentary assembly that will be held in Belgrade in July, and I think this will be a very much of a feature and a great deal of focus, and congratulations will be, conveyed to our parliamentarian counterparts in Belgrade. We all hope for a full and absolute matriculation from what was a despotic dictatorship to a flourishing democracy. Our aspirations have always been with the Serbian people, the Bosnian people, the Croats, that everyone on earth, including and especially them during this terrible time of war, they deserve peace, and they deserve the rule of just law and respect for fundamental human rights, free press, separation of powers. And thankfully they are moving in that direction very, very fast. And, they've had free and fair elections, and the more that happens, the better. And I think we just need to be partners now in ensuring that freedom, we never look back to go back. We need to look back to hold to account, but not to ever go back.
What kind of implications is the arrest of Mladic, if any, going to have on the Serb Republic in Bosnia?
On the
Serb Republic in Bosnia, the Serbs in Bosnia.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think, just like, one of the things that Eisenhower did that was so historic and needs to be replicated every time it needs to be replicated, and that is to, when the camps were opened up, the concentration camps, the immediate thought of the Allies was to burn them down, to end the stench of those death camps. He said, keep them up and walk the people through. I think the trials of Mladic and Karadzic need to be broadcast and very much featured in a totally journalistically dispassionate way on the front pages. This is not a matter of nationalism. The Serbs are great people. The Bosnians are great people. but they were ill-served by monsters. Just like the Germans are a great people. They were ill-served by a monster named Adolf Hitler. And same could be said for China with Mao Zedong. I mean, people have their freedoms and their liberties hijacked by evil men with guns and with secret police and with death camps. And I think I'll never forget on the car trip to Srebrenica through the mountains from Sarajevo. I was actually traveling with Harris Stalajic and Ray Search was also there. We went by a sidewalk stand, you know, along, in the mountains on the road, and there was a big picture of Mladic, and they were selling pictures of this man. And we went by very slowly, and I took a picture of it because I found it absolutely offensive. And maybe those people were naive; they didn't understand the full weight of what this man had done. But that needs to change. And in Germany, we had Konrad Adenauer, who also, not only did he apologize profusely for what the Hitler and Nazis had done, he opened everything up. And I think that's the kind of, attitude Belgrade needs to have. And for the Bosnian Serbs who were part of that partnership, they need to understand that as well. It only brings dishonor upon them if they either wittingly or unwittingly hold up these people who have committed such terrible crimes as somehow being a positive or something that needs to be emulated. It is to be condemned and never repeated.
Your anecdote about those posters of Mladic being on sale is a great segue to my next question. Yesterday we had a report from Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, East Sarajevo, where people still condemn the arrest and still claim that he is a hero and still say that there will be many more years until another person like him comes of age.
Well, there are people who still long for the Nazi era. There's still people who long for the excesses of Joseph Stalin or Mao Zedong or Pol Pot or Mugabe or Idi Amin. I mean, there are always people who will be fooled into thinking because a man was seemingly strong in repressing and slaughtering the weak is no strength. It is the absolute, it's pathologically weak, in my opinion. And that people who do that probably have severe psychological problems, like Milosevic did and others. So, they need to, the truth hopefully will set them free. And the trials, the more they're given objective coverage and the information is laid bare before them, and perhaps some of those who are applauding and saying someday we'll have another strong man like that, or maybe they committed heinous crimes themselves, and the excessive guilt, perhaps it's repressed, maybe it's not, is playing out in denial, just never acknowledge your complicity. What was the infamous statements being made by so many who were complicit in the war crimes at Nuremberg? I was just following orders, was the refrain heard over and over again. Same thing happened in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal with Tojo and the others. They committed terrible things and people didn't get it. So it's up to people who care about human rights to make sure that the information is very stark, absolutely objective, and I do think the Hague prosecutions will be all about fact and the presentation of fact before the judges. And then we have to ensure that people like that, I mean, there's a neo-Nazi movement right here in the U.S., there's a neo-Nazi movement in Europe. There are people who would love to go back to the bad old days in every society, and they just need to be reined in against and watched for their violent proclivities so that they don't get a chance to commit atrocities.
Now, there's Mladic's arrest and his transfer to The Hague represent really a closure, regardless of what. Oh,
I think this is a closure, but on the short term will likely reopen many wounds as the information is brought to light again, as witnesses, some of whom are now getting on in years, recount their stories. And one of the concerns we all had about the delay was the potential evaporation of good, solid testimony that would perhaps fade a little bit with time. But I do think there's such a compelling case. This was done in broad daylight. We have witnesses that I've had. I've held 6 congressional hearings, 5 on the Helsinki Commission and 1 on my subcommittee on human rights. And we heard from Hassan Nuvanovic, who was the translator with Mladic and the Dutch peacekeeper Franken. And he tells the whole story about how either naive or afraid or cowardly, who knows what, the Dutch were in this case, especially this group of peacekeepers. I quoted in my opening statement at that hearing, one of the peacekeepers suggested that they were just, observers. They weren't there to really protect, even though they had a mandate to protect people in the safe haven. And we've seen that repeated with UN peacekeepers globally, and hopefully that lesson learned has been learned, because there are 80,000 peacekeepers deployed all over the world. And if they just stand with guns not at the ready, but at we're in trouble. And as soon as the bad guys figure that out, it'll be even worse, because as in the case in Srebrenica, everybody was in the camps. They were able to just put them on buses where they were slaughtered.
Congressman Smith, thank you so much for finding time in your busy schedule to talk to us.
Thank you. I would just add, the Congress has gone on record. I actually offered resolutions that got all but 1 member voting for it, that called on the international community, called on obviously Serbia, called on us to take all means possible to bring Mladic and other terrible criminals to account, and of course Milosevic, who was in charge of it all. Serbian officials in Belgrade, I believe, have an opportunity, perhaps as never before, to put an absolute line of demarcation between the past and the future. And their influence on the Bosnian Serb leadership could be profound if they express zero tolerance for the atrocities that were committed by Mladic and by Karadzic, and of course Slobodan Milosevic, and all the other people who committed such terrible crimes. I remember Congressman Frank Wolf and I traveled to Vukovar just a few weeks before it was overrun and even more people who were slaughtered there. It's important that the Vukovar 3 were held to account, but I'll never forget how deceptive, in broad daylight, the Serbian officials then were, namely Milosevic, because we did meet with him on that trip, in denying that what we saw with our own eyes wasn't happening. We saw MiGs flying over. We saw one street after another leveled to the ground by artillery and tank fire. Snipers were across the river shooting people. We met people who were holed up in a wine cellar, who were frightened to even step foot outside the wine cellar. It was a big one. And they were down there huddled up, and a lot of those people were killed. And yet all of that was like it didn't happen, according to the past officials. Now is a chance to look at this the way the modern-day Germany looks at the Nazis. This was a horrific, genocide. It doesn't get any worse than a genocide. And 12,000 people killed, and that's one of the indictments against Mladic in Sarajevo. And anyone who's been to Sarajevo, I've been there many times, it's just nestled, the mountains surround it. People had no chance to get free and to dodge the incoming rounds that were slaughtering them. How do you kill innocent people like that? So the message has to be to the Bosnian Serbs from Belgrade: join us and be very aggressive in saying no tolerance for these terrible crimes. Have you ever seen those pictures, traveling over there? Because I was really taken back.
No, I was not in those areas.
I wanted to get out and talk to them. It was like, are you kidding?
I know. I can imagine. I am from Sarajevo, but I left in April of '92, so at the very beginning.
Sure.
I don't know, when was your trip there, when you saw those posters of
That was in, it's
Just
twins, research.
2007.
2007, they actually gave me an award.
Okay, 2007 they were selling those posters?
Yes.
Wonderful.
And
Well, I've seen them in Belgrade in 2007.
Yeah, well, of course.
Postcards.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's hope this is the beginning of a new.
Yeah, I think,
You know, and a new.
and this is where
nice-
political leadership comes in. You know, people in this country, elsewhere, you know, always have a rather low opinion of politicians. But political leadership in the cause of human rights now, and having zero tolerance for the past, can send a profound message to the new generation, which wants no part of this. I remember on one trip, it was a pretty recent trip, we met with a lot of college students and graduate college students, and they were, you know, they want to get jobs, they want to live a good life, raise their families, practice their faith, you know, upward mobility. Killing because of ethnic differences was you know, it was absolutely foreign to them. And that's the new Serbia, the new Bosnia, particularly the Republic of Srpska, hopefully.